Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Cecilia Samuelsson. Här är våra rubriker. USAs folkhälsomyndighet och livsmedels- och läkemedelsmyndighet grillas om obligatorisk vaccinering och skador. Lag om rösträtt för icke-medborgare stoppad i New York. Biden skriver av 1,2 miljarder dollar i studieskulder. Högskolor har regler för att begränsa yttrandefriheten enligt ny studie. Ntd's specialserie om kommunismen fortsätter, denna gång om infiltration i väst. Efterdyningarna av covid-19-vaccinerna stod i rampljuset på Capitol Hill. Lagstiftare grillade regeringstjänstemän för att erkänna hur effektiva eller ineffektiva vaccinerna är och varför de som rapporterar vaccinskador ignoreras till stor del av FDA och CDC. Ntd's Melina Weisskap rapporterar.
Officials from the CDC and FDA came to Capitol Hill with a message.
I want to stress that the COVID vaccine is safe and it is effective.
Ett påstående som inte gick lagstiftarna obemärkt förbi.
Can you still get COVID after getting the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Does it prevent you from transmitting it?
The data on that are very challenging to pin down, but it does not absolutely prevent transmissions.
Why does the CDC website then list it as a vaccine-preventable disease, and why does it call it a recommended immunization?
Utfrågningen som utformats för att bedöma regeringens vaccinsäkerhetssystem uppvisade för och emot huruvida amerikansk skepsis mot covid-vaccinet är berättigad eller inte.
The National Institute of Health also saw Ms. Dressen for her neurological complications that have been quite severe. They studied her and then they dropped the study and asked her to be quiet about it.
It's really unfortunate that we're actually here having this hearing trying to poke holes and cause more vaccine hesitancy amongst the public.
If in a small number of cases there are adverse results, would you agree that that's a general conflict or dynamic that exists with all vaccines?
Correct. I think we recognize that no medical intervention is risk-free.
Och med detta sagt ifrågasatte vissa varför regeringen införde obligatorisk vaccinering.
And some doctors contradict you and you censor them. Even when you're not a doctor treating patients, people are going to say, why does the government have authority to do that?
The hearing also brought to light that the government has largely ignored Americans who have filed claims of COVID-19 vaccine-related injuries. Of the 12,000 people who have filed such claims, just 11 have been compensated by the government. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskap, NTD News.
En appellationsdomstol i New York ogiltigförklarade den 21 februari en lag som skulle ha låtit icke-medborgare rösta i lokala val, inklusive borgmästarval och val till kommunfullmäktige. Här är mer information om domstolens beslut.
En appellationsdomstol i delstaten förklarade att lagen stred mot konstitutionen. Lagen Our City, Our Vote säger att alla med grönt kort eller arbetstillstånd som har varit i staden i minst 30 dagar kan rösta i kommunala val. Den antogs första gången i december 2021 av det demokratiskt styrda New York City Council. Det skulle ha resulterat i cirka 800 000 nya röstberättigade i en stad med mindre än 5 miljoner aktiva registrerade väljare. Progressiva demokrater som förespråkade lagen hävdade att den skulle göra amerikansk politik mer inkluderande genom att tillåta invandrare utan medborgarskap att rösta. Motståndarna till lagförslaget, främst republikaner från New York, hävdade att det skulle undergräva valintegriteten och minska styrkan hos amerikanska medborgares röster. Den republikanska kongressledamoten Nick Langworthy och en handfull andra klagande utmanade lagen i domstol 2022. Några månader senare ogiltigförklarades den. Domare Ralph Porcio vid New York State Supreme Court for Staten Island ansåg att lagen stred mot delstatens konstitution där det står varje medborgare har rätt att rösta. New York Citys borgmästare Eric Adams administration försvarade lagen och överklagade den lägre domstolens beslut. Onsdagens beslut i appellationsdomstolen har inneburit ett hårt slag mot dessa ansträngningar. Det är oklart om borgmästare Adams kansli har för avsikt att överklaga beslutet.
Författaren till en populär bok om valpåverkan, vilken undersöker USAs valintegritet, vittnade inför ett utskott i representanthuset. Hon beskriver några av de största problemen som USAs valsystem står inför.
We have one side actively attempting to throw its opponent in prison and bankrupt his family. Again, reminiscent of Soviet Russia.
Molly Hemingway är författare till boken Rigged, How the Media, Big Tech and Democrats Seized Our Elections. Hon kritiserade bland annat det faktum att valen tar mycket längre tid än vad de brukade göra.
The situation is so absurd that we have presidential and gubernatorial debates weeks after some people have already voted. We flood addresses across the country with tens of millions of unsupervised mail-in ballots months ahead of elections, frequently to locations from which voters, if they're even alive, have long since moved.
Vissa lagstiftare vid utfrågningen fokuserade på privata medel som flödar till valkontoren. De menar att dessa medel, till skillnad från politiska bidrag, inte är reglerade. År 2020 donerade teknikentreprenören Mark Zuckerberg och hans fru enligt uppgift $350 miljoner som i slutändan hamnade på lokala valkontor. De flesta av pengarna gick till övervägande demokratiska distrikt i vågmästarstater i hela landet. Republikanerna hävdar att pengarna sedan användes för att öka demokraternas valdeltagande. Utskottets ordförande jämförde situationen med Super Bowl, där San Francisco spelade.
If the refs were paid for by a tech billionaire from San Francisco, this wouldn't instill confidence in the game. The same goes for our elections administration. Undue private influence distorts Americans' confidence in our election.
Flera republikaner vid utfrågningen klargjorde att privat finansiering av valkontor bör göras olaglig. Demokrater sa att konservativa bör släppa sina påståenden om valfusk 2020.
President Biden skriver av ytterligare 1,2 miljarder dollar i studieskulder för att locka unga väljare. Men republikanerna säger att det tvingar skattebetalarna att stå för notan. Ntd's Vita huset-korrespondent Iris Tao berättar mer.
The White House announced on Wednesday that it's canceling another $1.2 billion in student debt for over 150,000 borrowers.
Det finns människor som lånade mindre än $12,000 till att börja med och har betalat tillbaka sina lån i minst 10 år. Och president Biden säger att det kommer att ge lite andrum för dessa amerikaner.
When people in student debt relief, they buy homes. They start businesses, they contribute, they engage in the community in ways they weren't able to before. It actually grows the economy.
Det nya tillkännagivandet kommer när Biden försöker vädja till yngre väljare. Han är också det senaste exemplet på administrationens fragmentariska strategi för att avskriva studieskulder efter att högsta domstolen förra året slog ned på en ännu mer spretig och dyr plan. Hittills har Biden skrivit av över $130 miljarder i studieskulder för cirka 4 miljoner låntagare. Men republikanerna har kritiserat Bidens strategi och sagt att den faktiskt inte bidrar till att förbättra de flesta amerikaners liv.
In the last 3 years, the Biden administration's Department of Education has put considerable time and resources to prioritize their student loan schemes. But they've been unable to fulfill their basic responsibility mandated by Congress and essential to American families.
Den republikanska senatorn Joni Ernst anklagade på onsdagen Biden för att ha infört socialistiska system och tillade att skattebetalarna inte borde behöva betala räkningen för ett räddningspaket på $1 miljard i studielån. Och kongressledamot Matt Rosendale kallade det ett slag i ansiktet på ansvarsfulla amerikaner som betalar tillbaka sina lån.
The White House, meanwhile, is vowing to cancel even more student debt, adding that it's going to leave no stone unturned to find ways to do it. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, Ntd News.
Enligt en ny rapport har 85% av högskolorna i USA regler för att begränsa yttrandefriheten. Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression menar att en stor del av den begränsande yttrandefriheten skyddas av det första tillägget.
Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, eller FIRE, säger att cirka 85% av högskolorna i USA har vad gruppen kallar restriktiva regler för yttrandefrihet. Av nästan 500 undersökta skolor fick cirka 20% rött ljus, vilket innebär att de har officiella regler som gruppen anser väsentligt begränsar yttrandefriheten. De skolor som står ut är Princeton, University of Southern California och University of Notre Dame.
One that we see, it's fairly unfortunately common, is a restriction that says something like you can't engage in offensive expression. Well, that's inherently extremely subjective because, one person may think that a certain type of speech is offensive where another will not.
Laura Bells är ansvarig för regelreformer på FIRE. Hon säger att högskolor bör vara centrum för debatt och undersökning, där studenter kan utforska alla möjliga olika ämnen. Hon säger att den här typen av regler förhindrar det. Regler som att
the only place that you can express yourself is a small, out-of-the-way area on campus. They're often referred to as free speech zones. And we also see things like saying that you can't put up flyers unless you're a part of a recognized student organization, or that you have to put your name on all of the pamphlets that you hand out. And all of these things can chill speech.
Andra regler inkluderar hövlighet, som ålägger studenter att tala civiliserat. Bells kallar detta för en subjektiv standard. En fredlig pro-life-demonstration kan verka civiliserad för vissa, men ociviliserad för andra. Regler för rapportering av fördomar, tal eller beteende som kan handla om vad en högskola anser vara könsdiskriminering, rasdiskriminering eller åldersdiskriminering. Bells säger att dessa är allmänt förekommande på campus och att konsekvenserna för de som bryter dem vanligtvis är otydliga.
Vi är strax tillbaka.
En föreställning som verkligen betyder något. För var och en av oss. Detta är vad du har väntat på. Köp biljetter nu på chenyun.com.
Depression plågar miljontals människor över hela världen och dyker upp varje vinter som humörsvängningar eller nedstämdhet. En framstående psykiater förklarar hur man inte ska behandla det.
Varje vinter drabbas miljontals människor av nedstämdhet eller årstidsbundna humörsvängningar. Detta är en typ av depression som involverar sorgsenhet, minskad energi och känslor av hopplöshet.
Depression is a psychological and spiritual phenomena. It is not caused by biochemical imbalances in the brain, which is an advertising gimmick by the drug company.
Psykiatrikern Peter Breggin är författare till Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. Han anser att människor inte bör ta mediciner för att behandla depression, eftersom han anser att depression inte är en sjukdom. Breggin säger att det aldrig har bevisats att depression orsakas av biokemiska obalanser i hjärnan, trots läkemedelsföretagens stora ansträngningar.
My colleagues in psychiatry want to call it a disease so then we can charge high prices, higher than the therapists generally do or our doctors, and we can prescribe drugs, which is by far the best way to make money as a psychiatrist. The media participates in this because they get a ton of advertising from the pharmaceutical industry.
Breggin säger att han brukade prata om detta i tv-program som Oprah, 60 Minutes och Larry King Live, men ända sedan medierna började göra läkemedelsreklam direkt till konsumenterna har de slutat bjuda in honom. Istället för att ta medicin rekommenderar Breggin motion, hälsosam kost och att träffa en bra terapeut. En terapeut som du verkligen kan knyta an till, en terapeut som du kan betrakta som din vän.
I öst, i länder som Sovjetunionen och Kina har kommunismen manifesterat sig som en totalitär regim med massdödande och utplånande av den traditionella kulturen. Men i väst har den tyst och systematiskt etablerat kontroll med hjälp av omstörtande verksamhet och desinformation. Den fräter på ekonomin, de politiska processerna, samhällsstrukturen och mänsklighetens moraliska grund för att få mänskligheten att degenerera och förstöras. Vi kommer nu att visa del 7 i avsnittet Infiltration i väst i specialserien Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. Filmen är baserad på boken How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World.
The 2016 American presidential election was one of the most dramatic in decades. The voter turnout was a low 58%. The campaign trail was full of twists and turns that persisted even after the election. The winner, Republican candidate Donald Trump, found himself besieged by negative media coverage and protests in cities around the nation. The demonstrators held signs emblazoned with slogans such as, quote, "Not my president," declaring Trump to be racist, sexist, xenophobic, or a Nazi. There were demands for a recount and threats of impeachment. Investigative journalism has revealed that many of these protests were instigated by certain interest groups. As shown in America Under Siege, Civil War 2017, a documentary directed by Florida-based researcher Trevor Loudon, a significant portion of the demonstrators were, quote, "professional revolutionaries with ties to communist regimes and other authoritarian states, such as North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, or Cuba." Loudon's work also highlighted the role of two prominent American socialist organizations, the Stalinist Workers' World Party and the Maoist Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Having researched the communist movement since the 1980s, Loudon determined that left-wing organizations have made the United States their primary target for infiltration and subversion. The fields of American politics, education, media, and business have increasingly shifted to the left under the influence of well-placed individuals. Even as people around the globe cheered the triumph of the free world after the Cold War, communism was stealthily taking over public institutions of Western society in preparation for the final struggle. America is the light of the free world and carries out the God-given mission of policing the globe. It was the involvement of the United States that determined the outcomes of the world wars. During the Cold War, facing the menace of nuclear holocaust, America successfully contained the Soviet bloc until disintegration of the Soviet and Eastern European communist regimes. The founding fathers of America applied their knowledge of Western religious and philosophical traditions to write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. These documents recognize as self-evident the rights bestowed upon man by God, starting with the freedoms of belief and speech, and established separation of powers to guarantee the Republican system of government. While the United States fought a civil war, that war was for the purpose of fully realizing America's founding principles by ending the institution of slavery. Over 200 years, those principles have done an unparalleled job of promoting domestic tranquility and securing the general welfare promised in the preamble to the Constitution. The freedom of the Western Hemisphere runs directly counter to the goal of communism, which is to enslave and destroy humanity. Masking itself with the beautiful vision of a collective egalitarian society, communism directed its envoys in human society to carry out its schemes across the entire world. While communism manifests itself in Eastern countries, such as the Soviet Union or China, as totalitarian governments, mass killing, and the destruction of traditional culture, it has been silently and steadily gaining control over the West, using subversion and disinformation. It is eroding the economy, political processes, social structures, and moral fabric of humanity to bring about its degeneration and destruction. Since the Communist Party does not have leadership over Western countries, communist supporters, wittingly or not, disguise themselves by infiltrating all sorts of organizations and institutions. There are at least 4 major forces driving communist subversion in the West. The first agent of subversion was the Soviet Union, which founded the Communist Third International, also known as the Comintern, to spread revolution worldwide. The second means of subversion was effected by local communist parties, which worked with the Soviet Communist Party and the Comintern. Third, economic crisis and social upheaval have encouraged many Western governments to adopt socialist policies in the last few decades, resulting in a steady shift to the left. The fourth force of subversion comes from those who sympathize with and support the Communist Party and socialism. These fellow travelers serve communism as a fifth column of useful idiots within Western society, helping to destroy its culture, sow moral degeneracy, and undermine legitimate government. One, communism via violence and nonviolence. In the popular imagination, the Communist Party is synonymous with violence, and with good reason. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels said, quote, "The Communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions." The fact that the communist regimes of Russia and China took power through violent revolution and used violence as a tool of repression drew attention away from communism's less visible forms. The branch of Marxism that advocates violent revolution is represented by Leninism, which adapted the theory in two significant respects. According to Marx, communist revolution would begin in advanced capitalist countries, but Lenin believed that socialism could be built in Russia, which was comparatively backward in its economic development. Lenin's second and more important contribution to Marxism was his doctrine of party building. Party building basically consisted of adopting the techniques of coercion, deception, and violence found in criminal organizations, and animating them with Marxist socio-economic theory. According to Lenin, the working class is incapable of developing class consciousness or demanding revolution on its own, and it must be rallied to action by external action. The agents of revolution would be organized in a highly disciplined proletarian vanguard, the Communist Party. The British Fabian Society, founded in 1884, a year after Marx's death, took a different path in the struggle to impose socialism. The Fabian logo depicts a wolf in sheep's clothing, and its name is a reference to Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, the Roman general and dictator famous for his delaying tactics. In the Fabian Review, the first pamphlet produced by the group, a note on the cover reads, quote, "For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal, though many censured his delays. But when the time comes, you must strike hard as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless." To gradually bring about socialism, the Fabian Society invented the policy of, quote, permeation, to take advantage of available openings in politics, business, and civil society. The Fabian Society does not restrict the activities of its members, but encourages them to advance socialist aims by joining suitable organizations and ingratiating themselves with important figures such as cabinet members, senior administrative officials, industrialists, university deans, or church leaders. Sidney Webb, chairman of the Fabian Society, wrote, "As a society, we welcomed the adhesion of men and women of every religious denomination or of none, strongly insisting that socialism was not secularism, and the very object and purpose of all sensible collective action was the development of the individual soul, or conscience, or character. Nor did we confine our propaganda to the slowly emerging Labor Party, or to those who were prepared to call themselves socialists, or to the manual workers, or to any particular class. We put our proposals one by one, as persuasively as possible, before all who would listen to them. Conservatives, whenever we could gain access to them, the churches and chapels of all denominations, the various universities, and liberals and radicals, together with the other socialist societies at all times. This we called permeation, and it was an important discovery. Many members of the Fabian Society were young intellectuals. They made speeches and published books, magazines, and pamphlets across society. In the 20th century, the Fabian Society moved to the political scene. Webb became the Fabian representative in the newly formed Labor Representation Committee of the Labor Party. In the Labor Party, Webb drafted its party constitution and party program. Taking a lead role in forming policy, Webb endeavored to make Fabian socialism the guiding ideology of the party. The Fabian Society later acquired influence in the United States, where multiple groups exist in the liberal arts faculties across many universities. Whether Lenin's violent communism or the Fabian Society's nonviolent communism, both are manipulated by communism's evil specter and have the same ultimate aim. Lenin's violent communism does not reject nonviolent means. In his book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, Lenin criticized the communist parties of Western Europe that refused to cooperate with what he called the, quote, reactionary labor unions or to join the, quote, capitalist national parliament. Lenin wrote in his book, for a communist, with a correct understanding of his own ends, the art of politics lies in correctly calculating the conditions and the moment when the proletarian vanguard can take over power successfully. He must decide when, after this assumption of power, that vanguard will be able to obtain adequate support from sufficiently inclusive strata of the working class and non-proletarian laboring masses, and when it will be able to maintain, consolidate, and extend its supremacy, educating, training, and attracting ever-widening circles of the laboring masses. Lenin stressed again and again that the communists must hide their real intentions. To seize power, no promise or compromise can be ruled out. In other words, to achieve their goals, they can be shamelessly immoral. On the road to power, both Russia's Bolshevik Party and the CCP utilized violence and deception to the utmost. The brutality of the Soviet and Chinese communist regimes has drawn attention away from the nonviolent communism found in the West. George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright and representative of the Fabian Society, once wrote, quote, I also made it quite clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing, and that under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed whether you like it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. The Fabian Society specialized in disguise. It chose Shaw, a literary man, to cover up the true aims of nonviolent socialism with beautiful words, but the brutality lies below the surface. Western communist parties and their various front organizations incite young people to create an atmosphere of chaos. They take part in assault, vandalism, robbery, arson, bombings, and assassination to harass and intimidate their enemies.
Detta var den första delen av del 7 i vår specialserie Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. För att se hela delen samt andra avsnitt gå till Ntd Sveriges kanaler på YouTube, Facebook och Gunring World. Tack för att ni har tittat och på återseende.